there's those who don't mind. Saying once again we must be cruel to be kind. I love to hear them explain the practical necessities of other people's pain, but the bodies don't lie. Bodies don't lie. Bodies don't lie.
Thank you, listeners. You're tuned into Buland Awaz and The Rational, covering public affairs and analysis from people of a color perspective. We broadcast every Monday from 5 to 7 from the unceded Coast Salish territories here in the Pacific Northwest of Turtle Island. On today's program, we connect with 2 of the 7 lawyers from the Coalition for Canadian Accountability in Gaza to unpack their historic lawsuit against Canada for failing to uphold its international legal obligations as they relate to the ongoing genocide. The plaintiffs represent the hundreds of Palestinian-Canadians and their families devastated by Israel's war on Gaza. They are seeking, among several remedies, a declaration from the Ontario Superior Court of Justice that Canada has a common law duty to take all measures within its power to prevent genocide. Joining us today are Faisal Bhabha and Jouman El-Asmar. Faisal is an associate professor at Osgoode Law Hall School at York University, specializes in constitutional law, human rights, and legal ethics. A former vice chair of the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, he teaches and practices law, advises public interest groups, and has numerous appearances before the Supreme Court of Canada. He is also an expert on equality and access to justice. Joining him is Jouman El-Asmar, founder of El-Asmar Legal, specializes in immigration and refugee law, focusing on gender-based asylum claims and family reunification. She has represented Palestinians seeking asylum and collaborates with the Legal Centre for Palestine, and is the spokesperson for the Coalition for Canadian Accountability in Gaza. We invite you to have a listen to this story. So we're always thrilled to connect with Faisal Bhabha. Faisal, you're a true superhero, seriously. We're so lucky to have you in our community, tirelessly standing up for innocent Canadians and taking on the government when justice demands it. And thank you for always being there to speak with us and helping to inform the public about these critical issues. And this time, Faisal, you've brought a fantastic ally with you, Jouman El-Asmar. Jouman, thank you so much for joining us today. You're clearly keeping great company with Faisal, and together you're tackling on this groundbreaking case that's making legal Canadian history. This is the first time such a case has been brought to the courts here. Jouman, can you start by letting us know a little bit more about this case?
Sure. Well, what it is, it's actually a civil litigation filed at the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. And what we're basically alleging is that the Government of Canada has failed in their duty to prevent genocide, as outlined under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, which usually comes into play when there's a reasonable likelihood that the crime of genocide is imminent or is in the process of being committed. So the Canadian government, as a signatory to this Genocide Convention, has the legal obligation to implement the articles outlined in this convention, and we are alleging that in the case of the current conflict in Gaza, that they have failed to do so. And not only have they failed to, in their duty to prevent genocide, but on the other side of the coin, you also have their unwavering and unflagging support for the Israeli military and the Israeli state, and going back, decades. We're talking about here financial support, weapons shipments, charities that are operating in Canada under the protection of the Canada Revenue Agency, as well as Canadian citizens who have been in the past and are currently going to Israel to serve in the military and to, be part of those who are committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. Another aspect of the case that we're raising is also the violation of the Section 7 and Section 15 of the Canadian Charter, which is basically the right to life, liberty, and security, as well as the right to equality before the law. And we are filing this claim in the name of two Palestinian-Canadians, who one of them was living in Gaza at the time that the conflict erupted in October 2023 and has since returned to Canada. And he has family members who are still living in Canada, many of whom have been killed. And the other Palestinian-Canadian citizen has been in Canada during, since the conflict began until now. However, he also has direct family members that were killed in an airstrike in November 2023. And in addition to that, he has been trying to sponsor about 15 of his family members through the Gaza Special Measures Program, and so far only two of them have made it to Canada. Mm-hmm. So that's the gist of the statement of claim.
Thank you for taking the time and outlining that for us. Faisal, given your background in human rights law and previous cases involving state accountability, what specific legal precedents or international standards are you drawing upon to argue that Canada's action regarding the situation in Gaza violate the Genocide Convention?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for those generous words of introduction, and it's wonderful to be back on your show. In terms of accountability, what makes this case particularly compelling is that it builds on a precedent of the Supreme Court of Canada in 2020 called Nevson. And that case involved a motion to strike, a proceeding that had been commenced abroad, and it raised questions about the application of international law in Canadian courts. And while the facts of our case are not analogous to Nevson, the principle in Nevson that was established or confirmed, a principle that was established or confirmed in Nevson is very important in our case, and that is that a norm of customary international law is automatically incorporated into the Canadian common law. And as it turns out, the duty to prevent genocide is not just a treaty obligation that Canada has signed up to. It reflects a norm of customary international law, which means that even if the Genocide Treaty didn't exist, it would still be an obligation on every state to act to prevent genocide where there's a plausible risk. And because that's a norm of customary international law, it is also necessarily, according to the Supreme Court of Canada in Nevson, a norm of Canadian common law. And so that's what enables us to go to the Superior Court, which is, your first stop shop in the judicial system, your court of what lawyers call inherent jurisdiction, to hear a case that really is about international law, because international law has become Canadian law, at least with respect to the duty to prevent genocide. And so the government can't get away from that. They can't escape that duty. And then beyond that, we say that their failure to prevent genocide breached their duties under the domestic constitution of this country. Why? Because not because the Constitution requires the Canadian government to care about the people of Gaza, but because the Canadian Constitution does require the government to take specific actions with respect to Canadians. And there was one of our clients was in Gaza when the bombardment began, and the other one, as you've heard, had family that were there, and they've both lost members of their family. And by virtue of that, and other Canadians that are stranded in Gaza or have family members stranded in Gaza, the government has breached the Constitution that governs this country. And so I just want to emphasize that accountability in this case is under Canadian law. We're not looking to break new ground in terms of international legal enforcement. But what we are saying is that the government has legal duties that may originate under international law, but which have become incorporated into the foundational law of this country, and that serves as an accountability standard.
Wow. I mean, mind blown, honestly. The way that you, the team, all of you, the way that you've been able to narrow this down and bring the focus and lens back right down to Canada is fabulous. It's just fascinating. I want to unpack that a little bit more. I maybe Jouman, you can help us understand this a little bit more. There were 2 points, and Faisal, of course. I mean, chime right back. I mean, the first one was looking at the Canadians having a right inside Canada to prevent genocide without any outside mechanisms necessarily being there. Yeah, help me unpack that one.
Oh, I think Faisal would be better.
Okay, Faisal. Faisal, let's go with it.
Well, I mean, the question of who has standing to hold the government to account is a good one, and it's one that we grappled with at the beginning of the case. And it was very important to find the right litigants who would not, and by the right litigants, what I mean is people who would not be dismissed by the court as illegitimate or as not having what we call standing, that is the right to bring the case in the first place. Mm-hmm. And that remains our anticipated greatest obstacle, is that essentially the government will take the position that either that our clients don't have the right to bring the case, or that the case is being brought in the wrong forum, or that in a forum that doesn't have the power to do what we're looking for, which relates to the question of what are we looking for. And I'd like to maybe just touch on that, because I think that would help answer your question. All we're looking for, and I say that not to minimize what we're looking for, but to say that it's very specific and very narrow, is a declaration. That is a statement by the court that Canada is in violation of both or either its common law duty to prevent genocide and its constitutional obligations under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to respect equality and life, liberty, and security of person. That declaration would not do anything to change the status of Canadians in Gaza, or of family members of Canadians in Gaza, of the reunification program, but it would be an important judgment of the conduct of Canada, the failure of Canada to take any effective action to prevent genocide. And it would have been initiated only because there are people with meaningful family connections in Gaza who are Canadian citizens. Mm-hmm. And so that's the hook. Mm-hmm. Where you have a Canadian who is impacted substantially, in this case, by the Canadian government's failure to act, you have in there you have a hook to raise these issues in court and to be recognized as having standing to do so.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. And then there was the second point that you talked about earlier, which was that Canada has a duty based on Canadian citizens, even though this is happening elsewhere, to prevent such a thing. Did I paraphrase that correctly, or what was that second point?
Well, it's based on the fact that in the case of Hani Batnigi, he's a Canadian citizen, a long-time Canadian, mm-hmm. who is from Gaza, who was in Gaza in October of 2023, and fled for his life and faced obstacles at every turn, faced the risk of death, continues to live with the consequences of the injuries, mental and physical, that he experienced during that time, and then Canada did absolutely nothing to encourage Israel to relent in the bombardment that was directly targeting Hani and his family. to allow the movement of people like Hani, who were fleeing for their lives, to safety. Instead, Canada continued to cooperate with its ally as it carried out this war on a civilian population that included Canadian citizens. And so that's what makes Canadian law relevant to the Canadian government's inaction in relation to Israel's conduct in Gaza at that time, and continuing to this time.
So, by virtue of its not being neutral and aiding and abetting the oppressor?
By virtue of it not ceasing to aid its ally.
Right.
By not changing its relationship with its ally. By not doing anything, right? And the thing is, if Canada had done something, it would make our case harder to win. I can concede that. If Canada had done something like recalled an ambassador, or canceled trade agreements, pulled out of a trade agreement. I mean, Canada currently has a free trade agreement with Israel that occasions plenty of violations of international law, actually, because under that agreement, Israel is able to trade with Canada's products that come from settlements, that are produced in settlements, illegal settlements, without being required to identify them as such, and able to intermingle that. And so, in many ways, Canada's free trade agreement prior to October of 2023 had already given unnecessary legitimacy to systematic war crimes being committed over many years by Israel, in particular the settlement enterprise. But post-October 2023, it's just absolutely shocking that Canada would not have revisited this free trade agreement, especially in light of the types of goods that Canada is trading with Israel, that include military goods. And that is a specific focus of our case, is the continuation of shipment of arms and arms adjacent products to Israel during a period of crimes against humanity and likely genocide.
Well, and let's point out again, I mean, that this includes giving the green light to people who want to go to Israel and join up with the forces there. These are our Canadians and our others. Yes, go ahead.
One of the things that Canada could have done, should have done, is begin to enforce the law, which it should have always been enforcing, against Canadians who go over to fight with the Israeli military, because we can assume that they're participating in, at least they're supporting a genocidal war, if they're not directly committing war crimes themselves, and then coming back to Canada to live normal lives here.
And been going on for a long time. It's not just a recent phenomena.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but as resistance to that toleration of that practice builds, we see things like the targeting of activists who sought to expose Indigo's CEO, Heather Reisman, and her partner for their support of the so-called lone soldiers who go from Canada to fight in the Israeli military. And instead of the public being drawn to the facts from the media or from political leaders about this Canadian CEO supporting a foreign genocidal military, instead there's the demonization and the aggressive prosecution of the activists, the peace activists.
Jouman, as a spokesperson for Coalition put together, can you elaborate on some of the specific ways in which the Canadian government's failure to act has impacted the plaintiffs and their families, particularly around the ongoing relentless violence that is continuing? How are they feeling? What were their hopes, I guess, or struggles in even bringing this case up, agreeing to take this on? Can you share some light on them?
Well, I just want to start by saying that the case does mention two plaintiffs Palestinian-Canadians, but clearly their situation, whatever they've lived through, whatever they've suffered, is a story that we hear time and time again from any Palestinian-Canadian who has family in not only the Gaza Strip, but the West Bank as well, in Palestine. So they feel, and that relates to your question, that they feel that they are carrying the voices and the hopes of their entire community in Canada, right? And as we mentioned before, one of them, Hameed al-Batniji, who is an elderly man, personally, he hadn't been to Gaza since he left in the 1960s. And he had just decided to go back in 2023, around the summer of 2023, to visit family that he hadn't seen in decades, to take care of, a family inheritance issue. And he got caught in this genocide that began, quite suddenly in October. And, he tried to make his way to the border multiple times on foot, to the Rafah border specifically, to evacuate to Egypt, as he was told that, they were bringing in planes to evacuate the Israeli citizens, right? The Canadian government was doing so. And so many of the Canadian citizens who were residing in Gaza at that time also believed that, the same treatment would be accorded to them. And unfortunately, it wasn't. So what happened is that they had to contact Global Affairs Canada from there and here we're talking about, no electricity, internet that's being cut off in the midst of airstrikes and bombardment. And so his daughter here in Canada was the one trying to communicate with them. And she kept being told that, yes, his name is appearing on the list of evacuees and he should present himself at the border. And then he would make his way to the border through the rubble, the destruction, picking his way through dead bodies, at risk of, being struck by snipers, the airstrikes that were dropping all over 6 times. And once he got injured by a bomb blast on his way there, until finally his name appeared on the evacuation list and he made it into Egypt at the end of November of 2023. But the rest of his family members weren't so lucky. So Hani specifically has 46 family members that were killed in airstrikes in Gaza. Tamer, who was residing in Canada with his wife and children, in his case, there was an apartment in Gaza that he owned that was left empty, and being scared and worried for his family, he asked his parents, his sisters with their spouses and children, and an uncle with his wife, his children with their spouses and grandchildren, about 20-something people to go to that area and stay in this apartment as the other area they were in was being bombed. And then a few days later, he wakes up to the news on his Telegram channel, because, the Palestinian community here, they all share news together via WhatsApp channels or Telegram channels or whatnot. And he woke up the news that specific building was struck by a bomb. And so in one day, 20-something members of his family were wiped out. And so he had another sister who was in another area, and as well as his wife's family who were still alive. And so he and his wife here scrambled. They put their life savings together, almost $75,000 US that they paid to Egyptian brokers and smugglers to try to get their family evacuated across the Rafah border and into Egypt. And like I said, these two stories are not that strange. I mean, this is what we're hearing over and over again. This is Canadians, Palestinian Canadians in Canada have been going through. Many of them have taken out loans, have put whatever they have left of money, have sold properties and belongings to try to evacuate their family members to safety because the Canadian government failed to do so. Many others have applied under the Gaza Special Measures Program, which, by the way, was at first capped at 1,000 applicants only. And still nothing happened. No visas were being issued until some started making their way into Egypt, where so far the latest count was 234 people were issued visas and were able to make it to Canada. And this is what they've been saying in their protests, in their sit-ins at Parliament Hill. This is what the Palestinians have been expressing in the media, in the news, and for anyone who cares to listen in terms of MPs or politicians, is that they are now broke, they are suffering, they are grieving, and they feel totally abandoned and left to themselves in Canada as Canadian citizens. So that's the current situation with them, and yeah, like I said, it's across the board. It's across the board for all Palestinians, fortunately.
Definitely, it's a story that we've heard over and over and over again. These two are just representing the thousands of Palestinians that are in the same situation, and I could imagine how much weight is on their shoulders, as well as you guys, all of you guys, taking this on, doing it pro bono. But there must be expenses and so on, and I wanted to give you a chance to let listeners know how they can contribute directly, or is there ways that they can contribute directly to this cause?
Sure. Well, the Canadian Coalition for Accountability in Gaza is actually made up of the lawyers from the Legal Center for Palestine, as well as the International Center of Justice for Palestinians. But it's we are doing the actual litigation is being done under the aegis of the Legal Center for Palestine. And so if you were to go on the website of the Legal Center for Palestine, there is a page where people can donate to the litigation to cover legal costs. We've already raised a substantial amount, but we always need more, for sure. We predict that this litigation will probably take about 1.5 to 2 years. So there will be multiple steps and processes and legal costs associated with every phase of the case. And the best type of contribution, I would say, is to raise awareness, talk about the case, spread the word, let people know. I'm sure you know, Elnora, that there was a press conference held on November 6th at Parliament Hill when we filed the case, but unfortunately we did not get the response that we had anticipated from mainstream media. A bit expected, I think, but it's still disappointing nevertheless. So we are counting on social media, on grassroots organizations, civil society organizations, to really share the news about this, spread the word. People can also follow the social media channels of the Legal Center for Palestine and the International Center of Justice for Palestinians. They both have Instagram pages where we are constantly posting updates, news about the case, so they can remain informed. And we just hope that the more people know about it, the easier it will be to garner public support around what we're trying to do and how we're trying to hold the government accountable, and just keep the genocide, the ongoing genocide, at the forefront of people's minds and in the news, because it's easy to just, it passes through like just another headline, right? There's always events, global events emerging and things happening, and people have short-term memories, but we need to keep talking about this. We need to keep spreading awareness about this. And I think that's how we will hold the government accountable. It's through a combination of legal action, but also political and public will, I think.
And I would just add, on the fundraising side of things, just for absolute clarity, we have a team of 6 lawyers who have been working on this case, invested hundreds of hours in over about a year before launching the case. So that's now, well over or around a year and a half. And those lawyers are committed to seeing this through and to continue working on this case pro bono. 2 of those lawyers is us, and we've got 4 others, and we are all working pro bono, that is without cost. So donations, what money is covering in this case is everything other than lawyers' time. And while lawyers' time is the most expensive part of any case, it's not the only part of a case that costs a lot of money.
That's right.
And so those donations are supporting those necessary costs. But we're contributing so much, and we're also gathering the contributions of so many other volunteers. We have a social media team that are doing amazing messaging because it's so important to get the message about a case out, and other people collaborating with us. So we just encourage anybody who has time or money or any type of resource to contribute to reach out through the Legal Center for Palestine with respect to this case, and we welcome you on board.
No, thank you for the clarity around that. I think it's really important for folks who are listening to get connected if they feel moved to, and there's lots of ways of doing that. So I guess I will leave with a couple more questions. I'm happy for you guys to throw in other ideas around what you want to communicate. But taking on such a case, especially one that is so complicated and a huge magnitude as this one is, Faisal, what unique challenges have you guys faced as you are and what unique challenges do you think might come up as you anticipate taking this further?
Well, we part of the reason why we took so long to prepare the case is because we really had to think through the strategy, the litigation strategy, the forum in which we would bring the case. For technical reasons related to what I was talking about earlier, bringing this case in Superior Court was not an obvious choice. Seeking a declaration as the only remedy, as the sole remedy, was not an obvious choice. We ended up making choices that we're confident were smart choices, strategically wise choices, but they did require careful planning, consideration, deliberation, research, and so those. That's not particularly unique to me in my practice because I'm not in full-time practice, and I tend to only get involved in cases that involve unique circumstances. I don't really have a run-of-the-mill practice. Yeah. But these are the unique features of litigation that I enjoy. And I think for other members of the team who are in various different positions in terms of their professional status, I think we all recognize that this is a really unique litigation. And what I've been actually surprised to find is, notwithstanding the lack of mainstream media attention, is the reach that the case has had, that information about the case has had. Even people who have reached out to me about the case who didn't realize that I was involved in the case. But I've had many contacts, even around the world, asking me about this case in Canada. Do you know anything about it? And I'm able to say, yeah, my case.
But that is no, I mean that's fantastic, and that's again, kudos to the entire team that is helping with the messaging and getting the words out, because mainstream media is definitely, well, I mean, by now we see it as a repeated cycle of continual failures, right? I mean, this one included. This is an extremely unique and important case in Canadian history. I mean, to think that the Canadian media has been so lax about it. It's great that we have social media and things like that are picking up. And this is one of the reasons we love you, Faisal, and we love that you take these things on and that you also give us the time to explain to us what's going on. Jouman, I wanted to also ask you, in terms of bringing anything else in terms of what you feel or what you want to communicate around this case to listeners.
Well, yeah, I mean, what we hope, like Faisal said, we invested many, many hours of our family and personal time into this case. And, most of the lawyers on the team do have full-time day jobs or practices that they're running. And our hope is that we will be able to hold the Canadian government accountable for their actions and their support and their failure, abysmal failure in this ongoing genocide. But not only that, the hope is that also it would maybe deter the Canadian government from supporting other genocidal regimes in the future. Make them think twice about sending weapons and arms shipments to global actors that use these things to commit war crimes against their people. And the other aspiration that we have is that regarding the Gaza Special Measures Program, Canada has shown in the past that they are capable of, being, of upholding the humanitarian values that they espouse. They have shown that time and time again in terms of other conflicts, whether in regards to Libya, Yemen, or Syria, and more recently Ukraine, where they have created very good and, very flexible and open immigration programs to allow hundreds of thousands of people into the country and give them a chance at a new life in Canada. Whereas when it came to Gaza and Palestinians, there was this extreme reticence and hesitation. I'm an immigration refugee lawyer, right? And we've been involved from the beginning in lobbying the government, advocating for the creation of a program or some type of special measure or way of entry for Gazans, for Palestinians, since it blew up on October 7th, right? And the response has been very slow and very, dragged out, I should say, until finally in January they announced that they were going to create this program, but it was so clearly discriminatory, so clearly done with a lack of will, of goodwill. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And and then people were scrambling to just, on the same day that it opened, they were scrambling. It was like a competition, can I get into the system before you and apply for my family before you do? That's not right. You're talking about people here who, like I said, are grieving, have put their life savings at risk to try to evacuate their family members. And then, you open up a program where they have to compete with each other in terms of places because there's only 1,000 spots.
I heard also that once you get into it, the application was very convoluted and difficult, and people were scrambling even more. It could have been easier, perhaps.
So the amount of detailed information that was requested and invasive information, I should say. Yeah,
that's right.
The form that they made for this program has never been seen before in any immigration program. The type of questions that were asked, like history about all the previous phone numbers you've had, all the emails you've ever had, all your social media accounts and handles. Do you have any scars on your body? And on what date did you get those scars? Do you have a medical report to go with them? The entire program was developed in a discriminatory manner and based in the premise and the belief that Palestinians are terrorists.
That's right.
And that we have to vet these people, and we have to be very careful who we let in. And we saw that narrative in the media around that time, right? Around the time of the creation of the program. So what we want and what we're looking for in our goal is, yes, to hold the government accountable, but also to let them know that it's not okay the way the Palestinians are being treated, that there is a rule of law. There is customary international law, there are treaties, there is a Canadian charter, and this is applicable to all without discrimination and without preference.
It's really crazy that we have come to this point where we have to fight them for these basic, simple things. Yeah. But here we are, and you guys, with the rest of the team, are leading the way. We look forward to catching up with you as we go down the road. Perhaps we can chime back in and learn some more.
Thank you, sure. We'd love that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, listeners. You're tuned into Bulin Dawaz and The Rational, covering public affairs and analysis from people of a color perspective. We broadcast every Monday from 5 to 7 from the unceded Coast Salish territories here in the Pacific Northwest of Turtle Island. On today's program, we connect with 2 of the 7 lawyers from the Coalition for Canadian Accountability in Gaza. For more information about this case, please visit the Legal Centre for Palestine at www.lcpal.ca. To every action, there is a story. Take today's story that Faisal and Jouman shared. It's yours. Do with it what you will. Tell it to friends. Share it on social media. Turn it into a television movie, or forget about it. But don't say in the years to come that you would have lived your life differently only if you had heard this story. You've heard it now.